can we maybe mirror the picture? Because that way all the picture will be the wrong way camera. Okay.
Okay, now your camera here is started and your presentation has started.
Can you move me around? Can you move this? Yeah. Let's try it like that.
Do you think?
More like it. We don't know what they're seeing, do we?
No, not really.
That's good. Okay. Ready? Go.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's get started. We're having some technical challenges, and I hope we have it running now. If not, we're just going to have to go with it. It's a pleasure to introduce my group here in Hanover to you students in New Orleans. We've been spending the week studying international law and international humanitarian law in particular. Today, the students will give their team presentations. We've practiced and they're quite good. I think you'll learn a lot. You may be saddened a little bit by the reality of these international humanitarian law crises around the world, but it's very informative. So let's ask, we can move the slide, please. There. Okay, here we are. What is international humanitarian law? In our course in New Orleans, we've hardly gotten started just studying introductory materials about what international law is, and we will proceed with that. But because of this special course in beautiful Germany, I'm looking out from the 12th floor of this high-rise university building. It's absolutely a stunning day. The sun is shining brightly. It rained earlier. Now it's cool, probably approaching maybe 65 by now. So it's delightful. After class today, I'm off with a colleague in the train. We're going up to Hamburg to tour that great historic city from the Hanseatic League, if you remember that from your history. And then tomorrow morning, I come back to New Orleans, where I'm sure it's delightful. Can't wait to get home. Okay, here you are. International humanitarian law is a special kind of law. And I think the title, I'm not sure who is so in love with it, but it doesn't really tell the tale of what it really is. It is, they say, in the name of humanity. It's that law that protects innocent people in combat, the civilians who get blown up. We've studied Ukraine in the war, and we know that the Russians have bombed apartment buildings and hospitals. These are the most stark and violent abuses of international humanitarian law that protects the innocent people in combat. There's an area of law that controls approaching and starting the war. That's jus ad bellum is the Latin phrase in our book. And I'll explain where we are in the book in just a minute. But that's a different area of law. To cause a war, to enter a war, to initiate a war, you normally need a legitimate international law excuse. And we see Putin striving to conjure up an excuse. He's saying now he has to protect the Russian world, Russian speakers everywhere. But that's not true. If it's a Russian speaker in Ukraine, he can't just take over Ukraine. Normally, you can go to war as in self-defense. You can go to war if you want to stop a genocide that you know is happening in another country. And you can go to war if you have the consent of the country. For instance, in many wars, one country will invite another country to come to its defense. and so they will cross borders and fight. These are legitimate reasons to initiate a war. That's a different area of international law. International humanitarian law kicks in, and now we have the wonderful sirens. Welcome to Europe, right? They're twice as loud as our sirens in the United States. Anyway, once a war is underway, it's this body of law that kicks in to protect people who aren't fighting, okay? IHL, they call it, is a set of rules that seeks, for humanitarian reasons, to limit the effects of armed conflict on innocent people, protects persons who are not or are no longer participating in hostilities, and imposes limits on the means and methods of warfare. IHL is also known as the law of war or the law of armed conflict. Okay? Our textbook explains from page 259, okay? The law of war, also called international humanitarian law. The laws of war do more than just regulate the methods and means of warfare. They provide important protections to vulnerable populations, including civilians, POWs, and other individuals who are not or are no longer combatants. For instance, a soldier. If there's a Russian soldier who's wounded in Ukraine, you have certain duties to give this person, as best you can, medical care, food, shelter, and not to cause more harm to the person. Obviously, you can make sure you can take their guns away and lock them up, but it's doing the right thing is what this is all about, okay? Now, here's a vivid picture of this city where we are right now, here in Germany. If you remember, and really this is what caused this area of law to be promulgated just after World War II. It's really a relatively new area of law. The United States, and especially Great Britain, did a lot of indiscriminate bombing. We bombed houses, apartment buildings, factories. We bombed everything we could bomb because we were in a vicious war against people who were not seemingly willing to listen to compromise or to any kind of cessation. And then, of course, we discovered in at least one of the countries that there was a form of genocide going on. And so we felt justified in bombing everywhere. And of course, ultimately, we did the big 2 bombs in Japan. Did we kill civilians? Oh, how many? It's just terrible. Here's Hannover in 1945, and there at the City Hall, you can see models of the city of Hanover through various stages, and it's tragic. Well, after this, as you all know, world leaders said, this is stupid. We've got to do better. And that's when they founded the United Nations, right? And under the leadership of the International Red Cross, leaders began to negotiate agreements to protect civilians and to outlaw that outrageous conduct on every side in World War II. No more of this. No more bombing civilian apartment buildings and cities, railroads. If it's a military target, that's different. But these kinds of things are not all military targets. This was trying to bomb people into submission, and yet the people were ruled by crazy people, and there wasn't a direct causal link. Okay. In 1949, the Geneva Conventions were agreed, and there are 4 of them. Okay, the International Committee of the Red Cross is responsible for the leadership in this area. I have been here for a week, sponsored by the German Association of the Red Cross. We had a big conference last Saturday at which several of us spoke, and then this seminar was sponsored by the Red Cross to teach about international humanitarian law. You're going to see in these presentations, you're going to see how bad we need international humanitarian law. It's awful, the situation. We're going to be looking at the situation in Ukraine that we have followed a lot in the United States, but we're also going to look at Syria and Yemen, and you'll see, speak for itself, okay? There are 4 Geneva Conventions, okay? The first, improving the conditions of the sick and wounded members of the armed forces. So, wounded soldiers, yeah. Number 2 is for sailors, shipwrecked sailors. Number 3 is the treatment of prisoners of war. And number 4 is where we focus mostly in our presentations, and that is protection of civilians in the time of war. Okay, the 4th Geneva Convention for civilians in particular. We've talked a lot in New Orleans in our course about the forms of international law, and we have here too. And these are called conventions. What are they? They're treaties. So no big deal. Call them a convention, a charter, a pact. They're treaties. And we have 4 of them, and this one in particular is what we're dealing with. The Geneva Conventions have this distinction of being the first multilateral treaty in history to achieve universal ratification by every country in the world. That's quite a distinction. And we always have some bad guys. Okay, the Geneva Convention relative to the protection of civilian persons in time of war has a special Article 3. You might want to make a note. This is called, excuse me, the Common Article 3. It's very simple. All 4 of the Geneva Conventions have the same Article 3. So it's repeated. It's the Common Article 3. Each party to the conflict shall be bound to apply the following provisions. Persons taking no active part in the hostilities shall in all circumstances be treated humanely. International humanitarian law. And without any adverse distinction founded on race, color, religion, place of birth, or any other criteria. The wounded and the sick shall be collected and cared for. So that sets our frame. I think you see what international humanitarian law is. You cannot, no violence to life of persons, hostages, outrages of personal dignity, that kind of thing. So when we see sexual violence, torture, easily it's a violation of the Geneva Convention and subsequent various protocols and other treaties. So with that in mind, we're going to get to our Hannover team. We're going to start with the Syria. We're going to start backwards. We're going to start with the Syria team. They are excellent. All the teams are going to be excellent, so it doesn't matter. Would the Syria team come and do their thing?
Hi, my name is Bruno, and I'm from Brazil. Hi, my name is Olga, and I'm from Hannover.
Hi, I'm Tilman, I'm from Hannover, Germany.
Hello, my name is Mia, and I'm based as well in Germany. So I'll start this presentation now. I'm going to talk about Syria, about conflict information, politics, and everything around it. So Syria is part of Asia and Africa. It's surrounded by Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, Iraq, and the Mediterranean Sea. So this is the part you can see the capital here. And the area of Syria is includes 185,000 square kilometers, and it's like the whole of Germany. In 2010, there lived around 21 million people, and from 2010 on, the numbers, how many people are living there, is going up and down because of conflicts and wars, so they also change. In Syria, they speak Arabic, and the currency is the Syrian euro. So, next. Okay. Next, I want to talk about politics. And the president of Syria is Bashar al-Assad, and he's the president since 2000, so like for over 20 years now. And the prime minister is Houston Arnes, and the ruling government form is a semi-presidential republic with only one party system, and there is a totalitarian dictatorship. The democratic index now in 2022 is at 0.053, and that you know how low it is. USA has a democratic index of 0.811, and Germany has a democratic index for 0.944. Like they're more than 0.8 points over them. Also, the freedom index is really low in Syria. It's at 12.43 out of 100. USA is at 78.71, and Germany is 85.22. So you can see the difference between safety and freedom and democracy. And also, really interesting is that women are allowed to vote since 1973, like it's 50 years now, and you can see that you know that they have to fight for it because they already had the right to vote, but they lose them, so they have to have democrats to get in that. And next, I will speak about the history. And Syria were founded in 1930, and they got independence on 17th of April 1946. Before they were under the control of France. Later we hear a little bit more about France and England. Also important is that the dictatorship is ruling the country since 1963. So like since then there is no really democratic movement that you can see in there. So it's like nothing really changed till now. Next, a little bit about people and religion. In Syria, they are living 90% of the Arabics, they call them Fani, and 10% of Kurds. The religions are mostly 74% of Muslims, 12% of Alawites, like it's a special migration, and 8 to 10% of Christians. So there are a lot of more nations that are going on in there. And because of all these different opinions and relationships, there will be a lot of conflicts. And they always want to show what they think, and often the opinions go against each other. So it leads to more conflicts and wars, civilian wars, all of this. More about the conflicts, I will go to the pointer to the next speaker.
Hi, so like my colleague was saying, Syria has a dictatorship and it was governed by Assad for 30 years. modernize the country, but he had a repressive government. And Hafez was the father of Bashar al-Assad that took power in 2000. And first, it was thought that he would bring democracy to the country, but it quickly turned into a repressive government as well. So in 2011, in what came to be known as the Arab Spring, Syrians took the streets and began protesting against high rates of unemployment, of corruption, lack of political freedom, among other things. And it was inspired by this movement in Middle Eastern countries to fight against repressive governments. And in these other countries, the movement quickly overtook the government. They managed to become more democratic. But in Syria's case, it was not like this. So that's because Bashar al-Assad violently cracked down on the protest, and he even allowed the military to kill demonstrators. But almost instantly, armed groups surged, and even some military men from the Syrian army defected from the army to join the Free Syrian Army. So in the first 18 months of the conflict, 600,000 Syrians were killed. So some historical background to explain why the conflict is still ongoing. As my colleague was saying, there is a big ethnic and religious difference in the country. And even though only 12% of the Alawites, only 12% of the people in Syria are Alawites, they are the ones that are governing the country since the 70s. So you can see the difference between the representation in the country. And also, what made the country have all these different people together is the fact that there was colonialism in the country, and after the First World War, the borders were defined by Britain and France. So they ended up putting together different ethnic and religious groups. And these, of course, since they don't have the same ideology, it didn't allow them to have the same goals and to fight together to from Bashar al-Assad government. But the fact is that these armed groups have also been abusive, and there were questions about intervention in the country. And the Security Council of the United States, however, couldn't employ any measures, as one of the supporters of Bashar al-Assad's government is Russia. And as you may know, Russia has veto power in the Security Council's decision proposals. So the sides of the conflict. This is a complex conflict because there are a lot of parties and a lot of parties that fight for different goals. So Bashar al-Assad's government has the support of Iran, Russia, and Hezbollah. So this means that there are two states supporting Syria and one non-state armed group. And then there are the Kurds that are an ethnic minority that want to have their own state. And the Kurds are supported by the USA, and these groups all fight against Assad. But Turkey doesn't support the Kurds' wish for independence. So the only group that supports the Kurds is the USA. And then we have other rebels that are supported by the USA, Jordan, Turkey, and the Gulf states. And then, as when I explained, ISIS or Daesh surged as a result, partially because of Syria's war. And all these groups fight against ISIS since they are terrorists. So as you can see, there are a lot of conflicts going on and a lot of political goals, different political goals. So by 2013, basically the Middle Eastern countries were divided between the seven Muslims who generally support the rebels and the Shia Muslims that generally support Assad government. In 2013, Bashar al-Assad made the first use of chemical weapons that, as we are going to see, is not allowed anymore. And in 2014, a branch of Al-Qaeda broke away and became Daesh or ISIS. And the focus of the United States to this point was to support the groups that were fighting ISIS, because the United States didn't want to directly become in conflict with Syria. However, in 2013, the United States actually threatened to deploy guns against Syria after the use of chemical weapons, but they eventually backed down. But in 2017, they used it again, and then the USA directly attacked Syria. So this means that it's a conflict that is going on, and there are a lot of state actors as well as non-state actors involved in it.
So now I'm going to talk about the international humanitarian law violations each party has committed. And so first of all, it has to be stated in this war, every single party has committed violations of international humanitarian law. So first of all, we start with the Syrian government and Russian allies. The Syrian government and Russian allies have used chemical weapons such as various fluorinated organic chemicals, which is a violation of Article 1 of the Geneva Convention, CWC, which prohibits any use of chemical weapons. They have also been targeting attacks on schools and medical facilities, and with these attacks, they violated the Article 51 of the Geneva Convention, additional protocol beyond. As these attacks are considered to be indiscriminate attacks against civilians. So the armed Syrian opposition committed indiscriminate attacks against civilian people by using indiscriminate weapons such as locally made rockets and flares. This is again a violation of Article 51 of the Geneva Convention for additional protocol 1. Another example that goes against the Geneva Convention is army attack on governmental controlled areas depriving residents of food and medical supplies. This goes against Article 18 of the Geneva Convention, which is about the protection of civilian hospitals. So on this photo, you can see a moment captured right after an attack on now, I'll move to my next slide. So the Islamic State of Iraq brought Yazidi women from Iraq to Syria, where these women have been held in sex slave and subjected to sexual violence. These acts clearly go against Article 27 of the Geneva Convention of Law, and as this article stands for the protection of the woman from attacks within the honor caused by sexual violence. Also, there have been several suicide bombings committed by the IS, which also pose a violation of international humanitarian law. Although suicide bombings are not considered to be war crimes, are not prohibited by international law, they are considered to be war crimes as they are causing a disproportionate amount of harm to civilian people. Therefore, this is also a violation of the Geneva Convention, especially of the Article 3, which prohibits and restricts the use of mines, threats, and other devices. On this point, we can see the moment after attack from in Syria, which can cause a lot of damage to civilian people.
Currently, there are three options how to bring these violations to court. One, taking Syria as a country to the ICJ. Two, taking individual perpetrators to court of the ICC. And three, taking these individuals to national courts. So, option one, the ICJ. Syria is party to the 4 Geneva Conventions. Unfortunately, it has not ratified the second additional protocol, which is related to the protection of victims of non-international armed conflicts. But Syria is bound by customary international law. Sadly, the court's decision would not be enforceable. That is because, according to Article 94 of the UN Charter, if any party fails to comply with the decision of the court, it is up to the Security Council to take measures to enforce that decision. And on the Security Council, Russia, as an ally of Syria, has a permanent seat and can veto any such attempt. However, even if not enforced, the judgment finding the Syrian government responsible for war crimes could serve as a valuable precedent for other enforceable courts. Option two, the ICC. The ICC unfortunately only has very limited jurisdiction in cases related to the Syrian civil war. That is because it has jurisdiction only in 3 scenarios. A, if the war crime was committed on the territory of a state party to the Rome Statute or by a national of the state party. And Syria is not party to the Rome Statute. B, the ICC has also jurisdiction if a state willingly submits to its jurisdiction, and Syria is not going to do that. And lastly, the ICC has jurisdiction if there's a referral by the UN Security Council, and again, Russia as an ally of Syria is not going to allow that. So in conclusion, there's only so much that the ICC can do in this conflict. Option 3, national courts. Perpetrators can be prosecuted by national courts under national legislation. However, there's a catch too. Heads of states are immune from the jurisdiction of another state's court based on the legal doctrine of sovereign immunity. So we cannot prosecute Assad at our national courts. Also, his high-rank officials responsible for many of those war crimes will not Syria and risk being arrested and prosecuted. So as long as they remain in Syria, they enjoy impunity. So now, if there was a regime change in Syria, then the government could waive Assad's immunity and then we could prosecute him and his officials would probably flee the country or be prosecuted there. But until that happens, national courts can only prosecute the minor players in the conflict. hybrid court. There are calls from some of the international community to set up a hybrid court with a mandate to more effectively prosecute war crimes in Syria. This court could consist of a mix of domestic and international prosecutors and judges. However, this comes with problems too, because such a court would require the support of at least some of the major players in the conflict, and as all involved parties, as we have learned, have committed war crimes, and would risk being prosecuted themselves if they agree to such a court, finding their support for such a court is very difficult. So unfortunately, until today, all efforts to set up such a court have been unsuccessful. So, in conclusion, the available means of prosecution are not optimal, but there are at least some options to bring perpetrators to justice, and of course, we recommend making use of all tools available. Thank you.
Excellent job, guys. We're going to find this problem with prosecuting these leaders in all of these dilemmas. So now we switch to Ukraine, and we have Ukrainian to participate in this, as well as wonderful Germans. Here we go. Oh, yes.
Hello, dear colleagues. Let us introduce our team that is going to speak about the ongoing war in Ukraine. My name is Igor. I come from Ukraine.
My name is Annika, I'm from Germany.
My name is Alina, I'm also from Germany. And my name is Andrea, and I come from Bolivia. So, now I'm going to start talking about now I'm going to give an introduction of Ukraine, and the capital of Ukraine is Kyiv, and it borders to the north with Belarus, to the east with Russia, to the south with the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, and the southwest with Moldova and Romania, and the west with Hungary, Slovakia, and Poland. So they have different languages. They speak Ukrainian, Russian, Romanian, Polish, Hungarian, Russian, and Bulgarian. The population. The population is, they have 43,637,000 people. And they have the form of government. The form of government is unitary, multi-party republic. That means they have one body, one legislative body, and the head of the government, the head of the state, is the president, and the head of the government is the prime minister. So I'm going to show you photos of the prime minister and the president. So here we have the president, Vladimir Zelensky, and to the other side we have the prime minister, Denis Shmyhal. And now I'm going to speak a little bit about the history in Ukraine. And in the 14th century until the 18th century, they were ruled by the Lithuania, Poland, and also from Russia. In the century 18, most of the Ukrainians were ruled by were opposed to the Russian rule. Then we have also in the year 1932 and 1933, Ukraine suffered from a severe famine. and it was called Holodomor, and it was under the Soviet under the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. And after the World War II, the Germans and the Germans and the Soviets were responsible for 7 to 8 million people dead. Then we have 1991. In 1991, they achieved finally their independence, and because of the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and because of the turmoil that happened in the 90s, the country was trying to introduce the political and economical reform that ended with a dispute in the presidential election of 2004. And where in 2004, the mass protested against the result of the presidential election, and this revolution was known as the Orange Revolution. After the Orange Revolution, the country remained divided into economical, political, and regional and ethnical lines. And for this reason, there was another protest. At this time, in the middle of Kiev, was in Maidan, where they toppled the government in 2014. So while the interim government was trying to struggle with the economic situation of the country, the Russian troops occupied Crimea, and at the end of 2014, Crimea declared independence for Ukraine and was annexed to Russia. So, and late in the 2021, Russia began a military buildup along the border with Ukraine. And in February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine.
So now I will shortly speak about the background of that conflict. You see that monument in the center of Kiev. I will shortly explain what it means. So, as you may know, for last maybe 300 years, the two countries, the two peoples have been more or less developing in the same context. Ukraine was a part of the Soviet Union. Earlier, it was a part of the Russian Empire. The two countries and the two peoples are really close, even though they are getting not as close as they were now. We speak Ukrainian, but we also speak Russian, and it's not about like a Russian-speaking minority. It's a language that everybody speaks, but some people prefer speaking Ukrainian at home, and some people speak Russian at home. So the countries are really close, share the same religion, the same historical context, and Russia is using this fact constantly on the political level. They kind of say, you guys, you are not a real country, you are just a part of us. Look, you speak the same language, you share the same culture, partly, and you are close to it. This has always been happening, and this is what happens now. My colleague mentioned the revolution in the year 2014, the so-called Maidan or Euromaidan. Actually, the word Maidan in Ukrainian means just a square, so a place where a revolution takes place. But in Ukrainian language, it has a second meaning because from 2014, it also means a revolution. So a square and the revolution. That revolution was undermining the Russian influence on Ukrainian politics, because it was kind of a revolution against the pro-Russian president and against the pro-Russian government. And Russia reacted to it. How did they react? They occupied the peninsula of Crimea. My colleague mentioned that. You may see that peninsula in the southern part of Ukraine, very close to Russia, also historically very close to Russia, 100% or maybe 80% Russian speaking, but nevertheless Ukrainian. And so they occupied it. You may see a beautiful picture from that region. So, shortly, the chronology of the first month of war. So in February 2014, there was a change of power in Ukraine, undermining the Russian influence on Ukrainian politics. What did the Russians do? In the streets of Ukrainian cities, people began to see the so-called little green men. Who are the little green men? The little green men are Russian soldiers, but who are not wearing Russian uniform, do not have Russian flag even in their hands. So people, obviously soldiers, but you don't have any way to recognize which country they belong to, even though it is obvious. But you don't have any obvious criteria. They took control, those little green men took control over administrative buildings in all over Crimea, and namely the regional parliaments as well. Controlling the regional parliament, they have declared the independence of Crimea from Ukraine, and 2 days so they declared a new country. And that country existed for 2 days, because 2 days later, that independent country had signed a treaty of adhesion, so a treaty with the Russian Federation providing for joining the Russian Federation. In the same time, protests began in the eastern parts of Ukraine, namely the Donetsk and Lugansk region. You may have seen the map. I'll show you the map once. The Russian-backed rebels have done this thing. They have taken over control of administrative buildings in the eastern part of the country. And on the 16th of March 2014, there was a referendum on the independence of Crimea, so we have talked about it. So in April, 1 month later, the same referenda took place in Donetsk and Lugansk region, the eastern part of the country, also proclaiming independence from Ukraine. And on the 14th of April 2014, the Ukrainian government started the so-called ATO, the anti-terrorist operation. So actually, which meant for the local population that the war began. You may see, so it started in the spring, in the period of the Arab Spring. In Eastern Europe, this development, we call them the Russians. So pretty fast, the Ukrainian armed forces limited the area controlled by the Russian rebels to see a couple of cities in the very, very southeastern part of the country, and that's how it all was developing till 2022. So, how can we tell the same story using the language of international humanitarian? Is it an armed conflict? Well, pretty obvious, because two parties are shooting each other, there are dead people, prisoners of war, etc. Is it international or non-international? Because, as you may know already, all the conflicts, there are no exceptions. All the conflicts in the world, according to international humanitarian law, are either international or non-international. There is no something in between. Well, the conflict is international at least because of the Crimea, because the occupation of a part of the territory by another country, or one country by another country, is an international armed conflict. But speaking about Donetsk and Lugansk, it's not that obvious, because Ukraine fights against not a state officially, but against a rebel group. But the International Criminal Court, analyzing the situation, has come to a conclusion that the level of Russia's control of the rebel groups is that high that Ukraine's fight against them may also be considered as an international armed conflict between Ukraine and Russia. So it's kind of important, because the court said that yes, there was no direct war between Ukraine and Russia, but the level of control of Russia's control over those groups is so high that it amounts to conflict between Ukraine and Russia. You can see on the screen Article 2 of the Geneva Convention already mentioned that it states that if the occupation exists, even if there was no shots, no one was dead, but if the occupation exists, it is already to be considered as an armed conflict, and therefore all the rules of law shall apply. So, but These difficult discussions about international and non-international armed conflicts have ended on the 24th of February this year because the Russian Federation has actually started a full-scale war against Ukraine. So all those discussions about the Russian-backed rebel groups who are controlled by Russia, more controlled or less controlled, all this, so it has no sense anymore because on February 24th, the full-scale war between the two states. You can see how it all began. So the Russians, you may know that Belarus, the country that is to the north from Ukraine, is a close ally of Russia. So Russian forces moved into Ukraine from all directions, from the north, from the east, from the southeast. And that's how it looked like the first weeks of war. Nowadays, we have a more limited form of occupation. It's just around kind of this way. All those territories in the north have been already liberated. So now my colleagues are going to speak about international humanitarian law issues.
Thank you. So I will continue with international humanitarian law issues. An era of international criminal law emerged after World War II, most famously the Geneva Convention of 1949, which aims to hold combatants personally responsible for war crimes, such as intentionally slaughtering civilians, torture, wanton destruction of property, sexual violence, pillaging, conscripting children. Other measures include the Genocide Convention and laws prohibiting crimes against humanity. The Russian army's actions give every appearance of violating these rules, and investigations have already begun in the International Criminal Court and some other groups. The indiscriminate shelling of cities and towns, the killing evidenced by the mass graves in Bacha, and the bombing of Mariupol theater are among the many actions that could be deemed war crimes. As you perhaps know, in Bacha, civilians were lying dead on the streets and in improvised graves. Young men, older men, and older women were killed. Some of them were tied with wrists. This could be a genocide crime. Russia, for the record, says the atrocities in Bacha are all staged, and it may well be that investigators will find evidence of atrocities committed by Ukrainian troops against Russian or collaborators. On the next page, you see an article of the New York Times. A 9-year-old boy was killed in a rocket attack in southern Ukraine. At least 10 people were seriously injured on Saturday when Russian rockets hit a residential area in the southern Ukrainian town of Seledon, as fighting over the Kherson region intensified. The local governor said. On this map, you can see on the southern side the Kherson area where the 9-year-old boy died. United Nations officials estimated on 22nd of August that at least 972 children have been killed or injured, mostly by explosive weapons landing in populated areas in the 6 months since Russia invaded Ukraine, though officials say the true toll was mostly live reports. On Saturday afternoon, Russian Oregon rockets struck Seledon, which had 12,000 residents before the war. The governor of Dnipropetrovsk said on Telegram the attack hit 8 high-rise buildings, shops, a kindergarten, and a medical school. The 10 wounded are in critical condition. On the left hand, you can see a kindergarten bombed with Russian bombs. On the right hand, the hospital. Here is a supermarket on fire because of the bombs. And you can see here also a map showing shopping mall destroyed, destroyed vehicle, and other destroyed buildings because of the war. The Fourth Geneva Convention, as our Professor Hugg mentioned before, has many articles. In Article 13 and 32, civilians is written, civilians are to be protected from murder, torture, or brutality, and from discrimination on the basis of race, nationality, religion, or political opinion. Article 18 says, civilian hospitals and their staff are to be protected. Under the Geneva Convention, it is illegal to prevent civilians from leaving a combat area to reach safety or block them from receiving essential medical and food supplies. These provisions have been repeatedly violated in the war, and some cases were documented by journalists as they happened. Article 14 of the Geneva Convention, hospital and safety zones may be established for the wounded, sick, and aged children under 15 expectant mothers and mothers of children under 7. Article 19, fixed establishments and mobile medical units of the medical service may in no circumstances be attacked but shall at all times be respected or protected and protected by the parties to the conflict. Also in the additional protocol of the Geneva Convention is written that civilians must not be made target of a direct attack or terror attack. Civilians have to be protected in any case, and this doesn't interest Russia. Russia went against the law, and so the Geneva Convention, and you already have seen on the pictures before. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, with its constant stream of videos and photos showing devastating attacks, has reinvigorated discussions about whether certain weapons are too cruel or too indiscriminate for use in warfare. We have seen videos of Russian forces moving exceptionally lethal weaponry into Ukraine, which has no place on the battlefield, Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield said. That includes cluster munition and war-on bombs, which are banned under the Geneva Convention, she added. But in calling out Russia's actions, some officials and commentators have repeated inaccurate descriptions of some of weapons. For example, neither cluster munition nor thermobaric weapons are addressed in the Geneva Convention, a series of international agreements that govern warfare. Cluster munition are a class of weapon comprising rockets, bombs, missiles, mortar, and artillery shells that splits open mid-air and dispense smaller weapons or bomblets over a wide area. Humanitarian groups focused on demining have noted that 20% or more of the anti-personnel version of those bomblets fail to detonate on impact, yet they can explode if later picked up or handled. The Convention on Cluster Munitions, which took effect in 2010, bans their use because of the harm they pose to non-combatants. More than 100 nations have signed the treaty, but the United States, Ukraine, and Russia have not.
So, like my colleague was explaining at the beginning, there is a host of legal agreements. But what are these legal agreements? They are also known like Wagner groups. And there is the question, what is the Wagner group? So according to the Washington Post, they are mercenaries working for a Kremlin-linked network of private security contracts, have taken up arms in Ukraine or on Russian behalf. So we are talking about a network of organizations that provide fighters for hire. And experts says there is about 5,000 fighters. Most of them are Russian with a military experience, but nowadays they are also recruited from elsewhere. For example, Syria. They have operated in 30 countries and they have 2 training camps. Also, according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, its management and operations are deeply involved with the Russian military under the President Vladimir Putin. So we are talking about a group of people that they are fomenting violence, and they are also looting natural resources and also intimidating civilians by the violation of international law, including the international human rights law. So, and also here, according to the US and the European officials, they say that this group is operated by Dmitry Utkin, also here we have the name, Dmitry Utkin, and but he is actually a former of the head of the Russian military intelligence agency. And it is also believed that Utkin is the name is this group, so they give the name from Wagner Group because under the composer Richard Wagner, who was the work from Adolf Hitler revealed. So there is another opinion that is very important, and this is the opinion from Sorcha Macau, who is the head of the UN's working group on the use of mercenaries. He said that the use of mercenaries instead of his own troops minimize the damage to Russia, and it also removes a layer of responsibility. And unlike soldiers, mercenaries are very difficult to identify. So we are going to talk about now some legal elements. And for this reason, it's very difficult for the international law to give an status to this rule. Because of 3 reasons. The first one is the lack of transparency in the organization and also the structure of this group. The second reason is because Russia denied its existence, and the third reason is because under the Russian law, the PMCs and also the missionaries are not allowed. So, according to the Article 47 in the additional protocol of the Geneva Convention, it established that what are mercenaries. But for this case, we have to take in account different elements. For example, the country, the situation, what is the nature of the country, what is the nature of the party to the country, and the relationship from different actors. But for this case, for this specific group, we cannot say that the Wagner groups are mercenaries because we cannot prove many of the important elements that we need. So like I said before, the Article 47 works only like a reference of what can be a mercenary. But it is not possible because we cannot prove important elements like the financial gain and also the motivational factor.
It's really again, we'll now talk a little bit about prisoners of war, which is also an issue within the context of international humanitarian. It is obvious that wars provoke hatred. Many people in Ukraine hate Russian soldiers, and I believe that families of those Russian soldiers also do not like Ukrainians. But simple soldiers who do not commit war crimes and who are just part of their national armies, they, in fact, are just fulfilling orders which is their duty. This is the idea of the international community which stays behind the Third Geneva Convention, which is aimed at protecting the prisoners of war. So the enemy army soldiers which are captured by another party. So what does the international humanitarian law say on their legal status? There is a number of rules aimed at protecting them, their life, dignity, their fundamental rights. Here are just some of them. So for example, Article 12, so just defining that the prisoners of war are in the hands of the enemy, and so of the enemy powers, but not of the individuals or military units that capture them. Irrespective of the individual responsibilities that make them, the detaining power is responsible for the treatment given them. Prisoners of war, according to Article 13, must at all times be humanly treated. Any unlawful act or omission by the detaining power is forbidden. Article 19. Prisoners of war shall be evacuated as soon as possible after their capture to camps situated in an area far enough from the combat zone for them to be out of danger. And Article 99, no prisoner of war may be tried or sentenced for an act which is not forbidden by the law of the detaining power or by international law. So the idea is these people are detained, they are not free people, but they may not be tried for the sole fact of being part of the enemy army. And they also the detaining power, so the country, the army that has captured those prisoners is responsible for them at any time. What do we see in practice? In our war, so the hatred between parties from both sides in every war causes violations of that provision. You may have heard about the Olenica case. Olenica is a village in Ukraine, but it's now captured by the Russian army. And there has always been a prison there in Olenica. Now it is used by the Russians as a prison for the prisoners of war. It has been recently shelled, and many prisoners of war died. The question is, of course, Ukraine says that it was Russians who shelled Olenica to kill the prisoners of war they hate. Russia, of course, says it is Ukraine who shelled Olenica in order to accuse Russians of inappropriate treatment of the prisoners of war. The idea is that, as we have read on the previous slide, in any case, the detaining power is responsible for the safety of those people. So it is obvious that if such situation shelling a prison for prisoners of war, if this may happen, it is a violation from the side of the detaining power. So in all cases, the detaining power is responsible for the safety of those people. Another article that we have, Article 99, that we have mentioned, that the prisoners of war may not be sentenced just for taking part in the hostilities, but from the media, from the Western media, we know that Russian-backed rebel groups, separatists, and the so-called courts of those self-proclaimed republics are sentencing Ukrainian fighters. Some of them are foreign nationals. Three of them. One of them is a citizen of the United Kingdom. Another one, if I'm not mistaken, is American. So, and another one comes from Morocco. So the three of them were sentenced to death. Nobody knows what's happening now. In any case, Great Britain including grave breaches to the grave breaches of the provisions concerning the prisoners of war are considered as war crimes. This is important. So the breaches of, and we can see what is considered as grave breaches, so as war crimes, namely willful killing, torture, inhuman treatment, biological experiment, willful causing great suffering or serious injury to body or health, compelling a prisoner of war to serve in the forces of the hostile power, or willfully depriving a prisoner of war of the right to fair and regular trial prescribed in this convention. So this is the answer that the international humanitarian law gives to such situations. It labels them as war crimes. So I invite my next colleague.
So the next topic I will speak about is the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. You can find it here on the map, so in the south of Ukraine. And on the 6th of September, so earlier this week, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, reported that the nuclear power plant had been taken over by Russian troops in early March of this year, but the Ukrainian staff are continuing to operate it. The staff in the plant has been under constant stress and is being restricted in their movements by the Russian military. The IAEA has inspected the nuclear power plant and reported several instances of shelling on the ground of it, but has not disclosed whose forces are responsible for the attack. It did, however, report on the damages to the roofs of various buildings, houses storing fresh nuclear fuel and solid radioactive waste, a new training building, buildings with the central alarm station of the physical protection system, and the container with the radiation monitoring system. So the destruction or the damages to the nuclear power plant are a threat to the environment and public health. So what does the law say about the situation? So both Russia and the Ukraine are part of the Geneva Convention and have ratified it without reservation. Important in this context is Article 55, the protection of the natural environment. Care shall be taken in warfare to protect the natural environment against widespread, long-term, and severe damages, and thereby to prejudice the health or survival of the population. So as you can see, this article is not exactly about the environment. It's more the protection is really a protection of the civilians and not the environment in itself. The next article, Article 56 of the Additional Protocol, the protection of works and installations containing dangerous forces, which includes nuclear power plants. So nuclear electrical generating stations shall not be made the object of attack if such an attack may cause severe losses among the civilian population. And there is an exception in paragraph 2, so the special protection against attack provided by paragraph 1 shall cease for nuclear power plants only if it provides electrical power and direct support of military operations. So the attack is not forbidden under all circumstances, but problematic in this case is that in wartime, energy from the power plant is used for civilian but also for budget purposes. And in the case of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, we are talking about the most powerful power plant in whole Europe. So it can support a lot of civilians, but it could also possibly support a large amount of military. And a separation in these two, of these two in wartime is nearly impossible. In the end, it all comes down to personal interpretation. Then we have paragraph 3 of the Article 56, which reads, in all cases, the civilian population shall remain entitled to all the protection accorded to them by the international law. So again, the protection of civilians is stressed here.
And lastly, paragraph 5 says the parties to the conflict shall endeavor to avoid locating any military objectives in the vicinity. So they're basically encouraged to keep away the military away from nuclear power plants. Reports of the IAEA said that Russian military personnel, vehicles, and equipment are stationed at various places in the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, including several military trucks on the ground floor of Unit 1 and 2 turbine walls, and military vehicles stationed under the overpass connecting the reactor units. So even though we don't know who caused the shelling of the nuclear power plant, we can say that it goes against the law in the Geneva Convention. And the troops stationed in the power plant by Russia go against paragraph 5 of Article 56 of the Geneva Protocol. So what are the recommended conclusions to this problem? Well, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, President Zelensky, and the IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi proposed a very simple and obvious solution to this problem, which is to create a demilitarized nuclear safety and security protection zone around all of the nuclear power plants in the Ukraine. And to stop the shelling near the plant, regardless of which side it was done by. Yes, I will continue with the conclusion. First, we have the ICC, the International Criminal Court, can initiate prosecution of any act of genocide, crime against humanity, or war crime on its own. A charge of the crime of aggression, the one most applicable to Mr. Putin and his government, would have to be initiated by the United Nations Security Council, where it would face a certain Russian veto. In addition, Russia does not recognize the ICC and would not surrender suspects. Ukraine also is not party to the treaty that established the court, but has allowed its jurisdiction over crimes committed on Ukrainian soil. Further, the Ukrainian National Court is an opportunity or an option to bring these criminals in front of the court. However, it's done seeking justice against Mr. Putin and others responsible for war crimes in Ukraine is a goal for the longer term. Also, on last point, it's discussed that everyone or many nations should send the best lawyers to Ukraine to win the cases against Russia. Thank you.
Well, they're being set up. Let me just tell you all, I've received an email from our law school in New Orleans, and you will be able to go.
Hi, my name is Emily, and I'm from Germany. I'm very proud of
My name is Angie. I'm from Hannover. And my name is Darren. I'm also from Hannover, and I'm going to talk about or give you a little introduction about the country of Yemen. To be more precise, the Republic of Yemen. The Republic of Yemen is located in the west of Asia, right next to Oman and Saudi Arabia, and the border, the Arabian Sea, and for the size comparison here, the size comparison with Germany and the USA, and I will try to put it about the height of the
now some general data about Yemen. As of 2021, it had a population of about 30.5 million. And compared to Germany and the US, it has net migration. So you take the immigrants and calculate these with each other, and in total, since the war started, it has a net migration of about minus 150,000. Some other data that was especially influenced by the war, for example, is the GDP per capita. And so as you can see here, compared to Germany and the US, we have pretty low GDP per capita. And what you can see on this graph, so this graph is Yemen, but what you can see until 2014, when it started to drop, when the war started, it was about 1,600, and not like today, 690. And even with the 1,600, it's pretty low compared to Germany and the United States. And when it comes to the human capital index, so the human capital index is a scale that calculates the contribution of health and education in contrast to the productivity of the country. And again, compared to the Western countries, it's pretty low. And for the population, as we can imagine, especially of the war, the life expectancy isn't pretty high. The education isn't pretty high compared to Germany and the USA. And as you can see, it's about 10 years or even more lower compared to Germany. When it comes to the government of Yemen and the legal framework, Yemen is a bicameral legislature, so it's still the first election of the president and the House of Representatives. The first official election was in 1990, and the problem with that is the president is elected for 7 years, and the House of the Representatives is on 7-year term, but no, president is 7-year term and the House is 6-year term. But the problem is, since the beginning of the 2000s, especially in 2006, there hasn't been regular votes. They can be put it on the slide. But for now, the big thing is there is no president anymore. There has been like council that takes the place of president and vice president since the beginning of this year. It is 8 members make up this council, and there is a chairman, which is also part of these 8 people. And right now it's Rashad al-Ali. When it comes to the religion and the legal framework of the country, it's pretty based on Islam. The Sharia is also the base of our legislature. And this is also pretty shown in the religion of the population. For example, in the US, the government expects that there are about 65% of Sunni and 35% of Shia. I took that from the government state website. But the NGOs, so the non-government organization, ACAPS, expect guesses that there are about 55% Sunni and 45% Shia, and Muslims in general make up about 99% of Yemen.
So I want to talk about the conflict in Yemen, and I will start with the history of the conflict. So as you saw, Yemen is pretty divided, and it actually was split in 2 nations for decades, in North and South Yemen. And in the 1960s, the war erupted. And after this war, there actually was a civil war going on until the 1990s. And in the 1990s, the North took over the South. A long time autocratic ruler, he's pretty important in this conflict, Ali Abdullah Saleh, once described the challenge of navigating Yemen's complicated tribal politics as dancing on the head of a snake. So I think this is a pretty big message from the head of the state. So this president took billions of dollars from the US to fight Al-Qaeda in the early 2000s. And so he fought Al-Qaeda, but only if it had an advantage to him or to secure his position in the state, and not to fight it like he was paid for. Yes. So he actually was ousted in 2011 after the Arab Spring. And this was a democratic uprising in this country. So the nation itself wanted, or the people from the nation wanted democracy, but they didn't get what they hoped for. So the latest civil war we are talking about today began in 2014 when Saleh allied with the Houthi rebels. The Houthi rebels are Shia people. So my colleague talked about this different kind of Islamic school, I would say. So they took over the capital Sanaa, and they made the current president at this time, Mansour Hadi, flee to Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia then founded a coalition of Arab and Gulf states because they believe that the Houthis are backed by Iran, and now we are coming back. It's getting a little bit complicated because we are coming back to this whole Sunnite and Shia conflict. This conflict actually started in the year 632, I think, with the Prophet Muhammad, because they needed a successor, and most of the Muslim people wanted to choose freely who this person would be, and a small part wanted that it is someone out of Prophet Muhammad's family. So this all began, actually. And this is important because here we have Saudi Arabia, and this is like the biggest country of the Sunnite. And here we have Iran, and Iran is, on the other hand, the biggest country of Shia. And here we have Yemen. So there is a yes, it is an important place right here, at the south of the border from Saudi Arabia, because if Iran or the Houthi rebels control Yemen, it is pretty bad for Saudi Arabia because there's a direct border, and yeah, they don't want that. Yes, actually, Iran said officially that they are not backing up the Houthis, but the US is also involved in this whole conflict because they paid a lot of money and it didn't go nowhere. So they actually found evidence or claim to have evidence that Iran backed the Houthi rebels. So this is not everything that's going on there, because there are also a lot of militias, and there are many still Al-Qaeda
and the Arabian Peninsula. So we have actually 3 wars going on in this state. The proxy war between Saudi Arabian coalition and Iran, the war against terrorists, and also the civil war with the rebels against the government. Yes. And also, it's kind of a problem. There is a theory that new wars are more brutal than old ones because it is not clear who is fighting, and there are a lot of parties involved. And often the rebels don't have the money to fight back the nations. This means they have to come up with or to compensate with violence, especially against the civil population. So this is also a big problem. Now my colleague taking over.
Hi, okay. I'm going to talk about the situation in Yemen. And Yemen is one of the world's largest humanitarian crises, and children are being run off the futures. Yemen is said to face the largest food security emergency in the world, and around 23.7 million, which is about 73% of people are urgent need of assistance, including around 13 million children. Only half of the health packages are working, which is about, I think it was this year 51%, and most remain operational with the basic equipment, and there's no salary for the health workers there. Yemen has the 5th largest number of internationally displaced people, which is called the IDP, in the world after Syria, Colombia, the Democratic Republic in the Congo. There was Somalia and Afghanistan, but now Afghanistan, then Yemen, and then Somalia. They've been living in exile for years under harsh conditions, and they're living in dangerous situations where their food insecurity and lack of water, without having a situation service. And we've got more challenges during the 90th period. I'll talk a lot and go to the next slide. The replacement of the Yemenis is, according to the IOM, the fighting in Erbil, Al-Qaeda, Hudaydah, Shawwal, Price, Oshaf, and Kashaf had led to the displacement of more than 157,000 people in 2021. So as you can see, there's the map of it. And about 4.3 million people have left their homes since the start of the conflict. And these including 3.3 million people remain displaced, and there are about 1 million returning to Yemen. And I want to say that Yemen is a big heart because even though Yemen is a worse situation than most other countries, they host up to 97,000 refugees and asylum seekers, mostly from Somalia and Ethiopia. And Yemen is said to face, and it makes them the worst, 3rd largest host of Somali refugees. And what are the biggest challenges people face in Yemen? There's a risk of large-scale famine violence, collapsing services, and protected displacement. There's an economic collapse, and about 70.4 million Yemenis are food insecure, and it's projected to go up to 90 million by December 2022. And the war between Russia and Ukraine has a big impact on Yemen because most of its wet meats are from there. And about 60% are extremely plants that are food insecurity or above, which is about 4.7 million children and around 50 minors. And 7.4 million require services to treat or prevent malnutrition, including 4.4 million actually, and thus including 3.2 million people who require treatment for acute malnutrition, and 2 million children under 5, and 14 million pregnant or lactating women. So now I'm going to tell you some facts about the issues we have here. So I'm going to show you a couple of different categories and tell you what's happening there, and then I also do this example to put the whole thing in perspective so you have a general picture of what is going on. So, yes, first we have what the International Humanitarian Law covers. So we already heard that, but I'm going to show you. We have wounded and sick in armed forces in the field, wounded, sick, and shipwrecked members of the armed forces at sea, prisoners of war, and civilians, also including those in occupied territories. We're going to start with the unlawful attacks and killings. So, first of all parties involved in this are committing violations. So, for example, Saudi Arabian-led violations as well as British forces are they continue to attack and unlawfully kill as well as injure civilians, which is a violation of Article 3 as well as Article 51 from the Geneva Convention. From the additional protocol 1, which is the prohibition of attacking civilians. Furthermore, we have destruction of civilian objects and the food infrastructure, which is the violation of Article 14, which are the limitations of requisition of civilian medical needs. Just to give you a picture of what is going on, we wrote that in 2021 alone, we had 38 attempted assassinations or even assassinations of civilians. And also talking about the food infrastructure. While we already heard that many Yemenis already live in famine-like conditions, yes, the forces continue to blockade or make obstructions on import and unnecessary bureaucracy or restrictions on movement, which made the food costs inflate and caused food insecurity among the civilians, as well as it made it hard to access aid. So, detention and torture. All parties to the conflict continue to detain people to possibly make people disappear or torture individuals, which is based on their political, religious, or professional affiliation, as well as the fact that peaceful activism or gender can be a reason for these things, which is a violation of Article 3, again, Article 51 of the Geneva Convention of the additional countries. Then we also have the gender-based violence and discrimination. So, women, as well as girls and LGBTQ persons, were especially subjected to the systematic torture, as well as rape and other forms of sexual violence. They also suffered cruel and inhumane treatment, which is a violation of Article 76 of the Additional Protocol Number 1, as well as Article 3 of the Union Convention. Freedom of expression and assembly. Peaceful human rights protests were violently repressed when they were protesting against the government or they were addressing the economic crisis and living conditions. While they were peaceful, still they were suppressed while protesting and even using gunfire and bullets to stop the protest, which is also a violation of Article 3 as well as Article 15. Here we have just some other topics that we are not going to cover today, but in case you want to look up and maybe learn some
more about these topics if you're interested. We still have the right to health, the right to truth, justice, and environmental degradations, just to give you some examples that may be interesting. And also, just really shortly, the death penalty. So, death sentences were also handed down, as well as executed, and they were even executed in public transport.
Right, now we have an article about the ICRC, and we can see the whole Yemen and what they're going to do there. So they have some relation field facilities, or work with transfers, also for the healthcare workers, that one or health facilities. So there is still something going on to help Yemen, but that can't be everything because there's still something missing. UNICEF is trying to do the fundraising. So this year, I think they got like $484.4 million to share to Yemen. They do have field updates, so they have therapeutic feeding center, and it's a lifeline for children with acute malnutrition. They do have the HAP, which is the UNICEF Humanitarian Action for Children, which appeals to help support or work as it provides conflict and disaster-affected children with access to water, sanitation, nutrition, education, health, and protection services. And in 2022, UNICEF HAP appeal total requirement is in US dollar $9.4 billion, and its largest appeal ever to assist more than 300 million vulnerable children and their families and caregivers around the world.
So for finding solutions to the conflict, there are many factors we need to look at. For example, the measurements from users are compared to what is happening there are nothing more like droplets of water on a hot stone, because they won't give a resolution to this problem, to the conflict, before time. So, for example, like I said in the beginning, there isn't a president anymore, and the elections have been postponed for years. This also, for example, has been an idea to give or to move the resolution of the conflict forward. For example, the last presidential election, I think, was in 2012, and so now we have a council that is trying to make things better, but we need to see things pretty young. And when it comes to the court, on the other hand, one idea might be the ICC, so the International Court of Criminal Court, and Yemen has signature the Rome Statute in 2004, but the problem is to be judged under the Rome Statute by the ICC, you need to ratify it. There have been plans to ratify it like 16 years ago, but nothing happened there. So the only real solution, at least in a legal way, would be to make a brand new court that needs to be formed already. And there have been ideas for moving around that. For example, in 2019, the European Center for Constitutional and Humanitarian Rights submitted a communication to the Office of Prosecutors from the ICC, and with the idea of maybe bringing the executive, of armed dealing firms that bring weapons to Yemen, or maybe to parties that bring these weapons to Yemen, or the ministers of some countries that push the conflict forward to court. So maybe all what they have done, even though they don't directly do anything in the country, may pile up to the level of the war crime, so we can help resolve this conflict, at least from an indirect side, but as of today, there hasn't been an update. The OTP still has to make a decision about it. So there haven't been any plans on another new board or maybe some progress on that.